Hello, everyone. So, the article that I chose for this assignment was titled How Immersive Journalism Affects Our Perceptions and Cognitions. So, first, just a little bit about kind of the angle that they used to look at immersive journalism in this paper was they kind of describe it just basically implementing new technology, kind of like VR and 360 video into journalism, as opposed to um, just kind of like the traditional mediums of storytelling. Specifically from the paper, they described it as giving a consumer a first person experience of events, locations, and stories um, to create a much more immersive experience rather than just watching or reading or looking at a story, kind of in the traditional sense, like newspaper or like news TV and things like that. Um, so within this paper, kind of their overarching like research question um, was mostly just that they're trying to figure out if presence, as presence related to how we've been talking about it with virtual reality, if it translates to other psychological outcomes of of when we read news, such as memory of the story content or like recollection, how credible the source is perceived to be, and then how much and like how empathy is felt towards characters within the story. Um, so just like going a little bit further into that, basically, um, the overall goal of the study, they just kind of want to actually figure out like the differences between 360 and VR. Um, they kind of focus more on VR, but basically they like take all three categories of like traditional text and image news media, um, just 360 video, so like as you would watch it on like just a computer screen, and then also with VR, like with the full headset experience, and then compare those. Um, in this case, comparing the 360 and VR to reading those same stories on like a traditional web-based platform. So specifically with this study, they chose two stories from the New York Times, and all three of or both of these stories were produced in like three iterations. Essentially, like they each had a VR production, a 360 video production, and then just like a text and image based story that was produced as well, um, which is part of the reason that they chose these two stories. But then the other reason is because both of these stories have like kind of differing um, like emotions or like feels, I guess, throughout the story. So the one on the left, the displaced, um, kind of just follows like the story of three children that were refugees. So obviously, it's kind of like a little bit more of a um, deeper topic that definitely could like elicit, um, more like negative or sad emotions. And then the other one called the click effect was just more about just having some like divers analyze dolphins and whales and kind of like how they communicate and vocalize. And that was definitely a kind of like easier, softer, a little bit more fun topic. Um, so they tried to get kind of like both sides of the spectrum there to also like help have that influence the results a little bit and see how people would react. So the hypothesis that they used within this research is something that I wasn't familiar with before reading this paper. It was called the main model, which I'm also find it interesting that they call it the main model, like MAIN, because it's called the Modality, Interactivity, and Agency Navigability Model, which is MIAN. But anyway, they decided to call it the main model anyway. Um, but basically, using this model, they were proposing that the three mediums, so VR, 360, and then like traditional news story, categorized into two or by two technological affordances, which are modality and interactivity, will produce different outcomes from readers by triggering three presence related cognitive heuristics, which are being there, interaction, and realism. So the method, which is kind of what I already discussed just earlier about the two stories, um, I think it was around 130 total participants from a university somewhere in the United States. They were just randomly assigned one of the three mediums, and then to one of the stories as well. Um, and then after they were exposed to the different storytelling mediums, they just basically took a questionnaire after um, going through the whole experience, and then they answered different questions, um, about immersion, their recollection or like story recall, trust, and things like that, basically. So, after doing this research and then going through the questionnaire, what did they find out? Uh, this is kind of when I first started reading this. This was kind of already my prediction and probably what you guys would have predicted also. But to no surprise, virtual reality was the um, top performer basically in every category except for the one over on the top right, which is realism. And for some reason, the participants said that 360 video felt a little bit more real than VR. Um, I'm not exactly sure why that is. But other than that category, VR was the top performer in every other one. Um, and then with that, 360 video then was the second highest performer basically in every category after that, again, except for realism, where it won, followed by text, which um, the stories were actually text and image based, but nonetheless, that still scored quite a bit lower in pretty much all of the categories except for trustworthiness. Trustworthiness, as you can see, all three mediums were actually um, pretty even there. They did confirm their hypothesis that VR and 360 video are both effective tools for directly increasing levels of immersion, credibility, recollection, and empathy in journalistic storytelling. Um, and like I said, I think probably any of us in this course, with what we know now, if we were to read kind of what they were proposing to study in this research, I think we all probably could have made a pretty educated guess that that would have been the outcome um, with this research. So, with all of that being said, I have a few discussion points for you guys. Um, the first one is kind of just pretty simple. I just am curious if you guys, if any of you have experienced VR or 360 video, but kind of like in more of a journalism setting versus just like VR gaming or like just kind of like a random 360 video, but something that's a little bit more like newsy or like story focused, I guess. And if you have, um, what you thought of it. Like some of the things that they mentioned in this research, like better recollection, more empathy, and things like that. Did you experience that, or did you just find it distracting? So I'm just curious how you guys felt about that. Secondly, what kinds of stories would interest you enough to watch them in VR? So, for example, I would assume something like, I don't know, I don't have something specific off the top of my head, but some like very dull story that's not really that interesting, um, probably, you know, would not entice you or many people to want to experience it in VR. Um, so I'm just kind of wondering what kinds of things you guys think would work best for experiencing in VR. And then lastly, do you think VR journalism will overtake traditional forms of media? And if so, when do you think that might happen? Or if you think it won't, same thing for that. Why do you think it would not happen? So that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you're all doing well, and talk to you sometime.